Hey everybody, just Justin here, back with another video for you. And we are continuing on with Pride Month. And this is my first film, not really review, but maybe discussion surrounding Pride. It's a gay themed movie. And of course, I want to start with the horror movie genre. And throughout this month, you're going to hear me talk about gay themed movies, LGBTQ plus films, but I also want to talk about horror movies that are either gay themed or surround, gay cinema, LGBTQ plus cinema, because there's some great horror movies out there. Rather that be characters in a movie or the movies themselves, again, being gay themed or LGBTQ plus themed. I really want to talk about them, discuss them, go over them, and recommend them to you all. But the first one I'm going to talk about is a movie that everybody knows. It's part of a famous franchise. And you all know what I'm talking about by the title of the video and the title down below. And that is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, in my opinion, this is not only one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies in the franchise, it's not only one of the best horror movie sequels ever made, but it's also one of my favorites, if not my favorite. I'm going to say favorite gay-themed horror movie out there. Some people might disagree and say, well, it's not really gay-themed, but I think it is. I think a majority of us think that way. It's a movie that when I grew up, I didn't see the, subtle stuff in the movie. Not really subtle now. There's things sprinkled throughout it that are definitely, LGBTQ plus related in there. And the writer for the longest time even said that, he didn't make this movie intentionally it being gay themed or have the gay subtext in the movie. He was just writing a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and it just so happened that there was subtext throughout the film, sprinkled throughout the movie, that were very gay-themed heavy in it. And, at one point even blamed Mark Patton for his performance, saying, it's not my fault that Mark Patton performed the way he did in the movie. But anyway, after that, decades later, the writer admitted that he did intentionally put a lot of the gay subtext in the movie. For me, it is definitely a gay-themed horror movie. It is the best gay-themed horror movie we have out here. And it's one of the first gay-themed horror movies that we had. We might have had some in the past, but this is the one that I really, as I was watching it throughout the years, over and over, is the one that, for me, as I was catching these subtext throughout the movie, for me it was, in my opinion, the first gay-themed horror movie that we had, or at least the first one that I saw. And it was such a great movie to have for the LGBTQ plus community. Especially if you're a horror movie fan, because there's not a lot of horror movies out there that are gay themed. We're definitely getting a lot more nowadays as the years go by. But back in 1985, first of all, being gay in Hollywood, at least, if you're an actor or an actress, was, very unheard of. And if you were openly gay, there was a chance that you might not work. So there was a lot of actors who, stayed in the closet because they didn't want their careers jeopardized. And the LGBTQ plus community, not for everybody, but there was, people out there, and there's still people out there today who are very much against the community, and they don't think that they should have rights and they should not be able to work and do things that other people do. And it was very much like that in the 80s. And then you had the AIDS epidemic that happened in the 80s. So there was a lot going on in the 80s, especially, where when you got a movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, especially in the horror movie genre, it was very rare that you had, a gay-themed horror movie out there. I love A Nightmare on Elm Elm Street 2. It's without a doubt one of my favorites in the franchise. It's definitely top 5 for me. I love this movie so much. Things I love about the movie. I really love Mark Patton as Jesse. For the longest time, some people said he was like the worst character in the franchise. I've always thought he was one of the strongest characters in the franchise. I still think he's one of the strongest characters in the franchise. I really love that character, and I wish we would have gotten more Jesse in other sequels, but with the way this movie was criticized, we never got to see Jesse again. So it would be nice and refreshing to see Jesse back in some way in this franchise. Rather that be a fan-made movie, which a lot of independent directors are releasing fan-made films. I'd love to see Jesse back, or maybe a potential new Nightmare on Elm Street movie in the future. We could have Jesse some way into back in this franchise. I would love that because I love the character and I love Mark Patton. I think he's one of the kindest people, and I've met him twice, and I just absolutely adore him. So I would love to have that character back. One of my other favorite things about Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is the strong cast that we have overall. We have a really great, strong cast. We have Jesse, Mark Patton, he is amazing. But you also have Kim Myers, who plays Lisa in the movie. Again, another strong character and one of my favorite characters in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I think she is equally as amazing as Jesse in this movie. And she has some really strong moments, like the moment towards the end of the movie, or at the end of the movie, where she's confronting Freddy in the boiler room. That's one of the best performances in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and one of the best scenes. And I really love that character. And again, when we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street characters, a lot of the characters from Part 2 don't really get enough love. They should get more love. And I really love Lisa Kim Myers in this. I think she's great. I also thought she was great in Hellraiser 4. She's in that movie too, Kim Myers. But she's great in this movie. She works really well with Mark Patton's Jesse. And their chemistry is really good in the film. You have a lot of other great characters in this. You have Grady, Robert Russler in the movie. Just a really great cast in this film. And then, of course, you have Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger. In my opinion, he gives the scariest performance in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise in this movie. I think Freddy is the scariest that we've ever seen him in this movie. I really love Robert Englund's performance. And it's so funny that, when they started filming this movie, they didn't think they needed Robert, so they hired a stunt double. And there's maybe 1 or 2 moments in this film where you see the stunt double, but a lot of it's Robert Englund because they realized that they needed him. The studio at first thought, we don't need him. He's just a man with, makeup on. But Robert's really made this character, and that's why people still love him today as Freddy Krueger. And that's why people love Robert Englund. I mean, I love Robert Englund. The story for me is one of the most original stories that we've had in this franchise. The first movie's story was original because we really had not seen a slasher movie like that. It was a dreamlike slasher film, and if you die in your dream, you die in real life. Like, there was no way of getting away from Freddy Krueger. And then throughout the franchise, you had unique twists on a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But for me, Freddy's Revenge at the time was the most original until we got New Nightmare, because this was the first time that we saw Freddy out in the real world. And some people criticized it, and some people didn't like that idea of how, Freddy was able to come out in the real world. But I really like that. And I like the idea that, like, Mark Patton's character, Jesse, is possessed by Freddy. So when Freddy comes out in the real world, he's possessing Jesse's character. And you see that moment when Jesse's being possessed by Grady before Grady dies, and Freddy pops out of Jesse's body. Yeah, again, one of the most original and darkest films in this franchise. This is one of the most darkest movies in this franchise. Um, so I really love that. Again, one of the scariest movies in this franchise, if not the scariest movie. Not the best, but certainly one of the best ones. I absolutely love it. I've always loved this movie. Even back when I first saw the film, when I saw the movie, in its whole run, I think back in '07, there wasn't a lot of people talking about this movie. And when they were talking about it, they were talking about how bad it was. And I never thought it was a terrible movie. I've always loved this film. So I'm glad now that there is a fan base for it and more people are watching it and appreciating the movie. I really love the gay theme that's in this film. I love the subtext throughout the movie. Again, I love the fact that we have in the horror movie genre, again, very rare at the time, a gay themed horror movie. We've had some sprinkled throughout the decades, but this, at least for me, was the first, gay themed horror movie that I saw. And this is even before I came out. Like, this was '07 that I saw this movie. I remember seeing it when I was younger, kind of sprinkled throughout, but I didn't, really pay attention to it. And Freddy Krueger terrified me. So I really didn't watch this franchise until I was in my late teens. But I remember the first time I saw this movie as a whole and watching it and really loving it. And again, throughout the years when I would watch it more and more, it was just so so cool and so refreshing to see a gay themed horror movie. And I love that not only we have this movie, but there's some other gay themed horror movies that I want to talk about that I recommend you all watch that you're going to see me talk about throughout this month. I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope you guys don't mind. I'm just really passionate about this movie. I love this movie. I've always loved this movie. I loved it when other people didn't love it. But again, I'm glad that there is a fan base now for this film. It's still pretty underrated compared to some of the other Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Again, these characters that we have in this film that are great, we didn't really see them anymore. They weren't in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. They weren't in any of the other Nightmare films after this. So I'd really love to see, if any of them, I'd really love to see Mark Patton come back somehow as Jesse. I would love to see where the character is, what he's doing. It would be really nice to see him back because Mark Patton's a fantastic person and I love him. And he's always, when you meet him at conventions, he's always so pleasant and nice to everybody that he meets. And it's just such a great experience when you meet somebody like that at these conventions. So yeah, I love A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I think it's one of those movies that if you haven't seen it in a long time, maybe when you first saw it, you just didn't like the movie, I'd go back and watch it again. Go back and watch it now, have a fresh take on it, and appreciate the movie. Love the film. Maybe you'll love it this time around. It's always been, again, a favorite of mine. I love and adore this movie so much. Some of the things I want to show off real quick, of course, we have the awesome Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddy's Revenge VHS tape, which is in the VHS tape box set. So I really love that. See, that is a stunt double right there. That's not Robert Englund. So that was one of the rare times you saw the other Freddy Krueger in the movie. One of the very rare times. The next thing is the Snapper Case DVD. So there is a Blu-ray out there, and I have the Blu-ray set, but we don't have a standalone, so I didn't want to show that off. I really love this artwork too. This is a poster that I have that's actually rolled up right now that Mark Patton signed. But I've always loved this, and I think this is my favorite of the old school Nightmare on Elm Street artworks. I just really love that. I wouldn't say simple design. There's a lot of cool things there, but it's not like overdone. It's just very nice, and I love that. Then you got some really cool content. So before the first thing I'm going to talk about, when we got stuff like this, we weren't getting a lot of bonus features really with the other films in the franchise. A lot of the times, like Nightmare on Elm Street 1, got the documentaries and got a lot of the talk. Nightmare on Elm Street 2, you really didn't know too much about the film. And in fact, until this documentary that I'm going to show came out, you didn't hear from Mark Patton. So a lot of people wanted to know what happened to Jesse, what happened to Mark Patton. And so when we got Never Sleep Again, the Elm Street Legacy documentary, you got to see, you saw Mark Patton again. It was really cool to see him. And I adore this man so much. But I love the fact that you had a documentary like this come out where not only did it cover the first movie, but it covered the entire franchise leading up to New Nightmare, or no, I'm sorry, Freddy versus Jason, with a little bit of the remake talk. So this is when the remake was coming out. So it covered the first movie up to Freddy versus Jason, but it was so nice to see a movie like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 get the love and get the talk. They talked about, the making of the movie. They talked about the release of the film. Like, it was, again, criticized. Like, people did not like this movie. And there was a lot of people for a good portion of the decades that did not like Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Again, I felt like I was one of those rare people that loved it. I remember back on the early days of YouTube, and even on, websites, where a lot of people didn't like Nightmare on Elm Street 2. They thought it was a terrible film. I've always disagreed with them. I think it's a fantastic movie. So I'm glad there's a fan base now, but at one point, people really hated the movie. But anyway, going back to this documentary, it is a great documentary talking about the movie. You get to see not only Mark Patton come back, again, I adore him, but you get to see Kim Myers come back, you have the director come back, you have the other cast members come back. A really amazing documentary. If you're a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, you want to own this. If you've never seen it, check that one out. And one of my personal favorite things as far as documentaries go is the Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. My Nightmare on Elm Street. So this is a documentary about Mark Patton, and it talks about, before his life growing up, realizing he was gay, coming to terms with it, growing up gay, and then, starting his career, getting Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and then his life after Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So it covers his life, and it covers, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 again, and also it covers his life after Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's a beautiful documentary. Mark Patton is fantastic. I love him so much. But it's also a very sad documentary. You dive more into Mark Patton's life. Again, you dive into the 80s, which, again, in the 80s, the AIDS epidemic was happening, and a lot of people were dying, and it was just a very sad time. Like, I love the 80s, but then there's parts of the 80s that really make me sad, and this was one of those times. It was also one of those times that, again, you had a lot of actors who weren't openly gay, because if they came out, like, their careers could be in jeopardy. They could not act again. Like, there was that risk there. And, for Mark, after doing Nightmare on Elm Street 2, he was criticized for the movie. His performance was criticized. And a lot of people in Hollywood were typecasting him, or they weren't casting him in movies because of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So this movie wasn't always loved. It was not a film that was always loved. Over the years, a fan base grew for the film, but it was a movie that when it came out, it affected Mark's life, and it wasn't a film that was always loved. There was a lot of hate for the film, and it wasn't until, I'd say, the past, again, when I started YouTube, there wasn't a lot of people that loved it. So I'd say, like, it wasn't until the past, I'd say probably 10, 12 years that more and more people started loving and appreciating the movie. I think there was always fans of the film, but it wasn't a film that was, like, loved by everybody. And now I'm seeing the love that it always deserved. Like, there's some people that say it's their favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I love that, because it's one of my favorites. It's not my favorite, but it is one of my favorites. And I've always adored and loved this movie. But anyway, going back to this documentary, it's a really fantastic documentary, again, about Mark Patton's life before Nightmare on Elm Street 2, during the making of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the release of it, and after Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And it wraps up with him sitting with the writer, because the writer, again, for the longest time said, I never intended to have Nightmare on Elm Street 2 be this gay themed movie. It was Mark Patton's performance that made it what it was. So he, his intentions originally, he said, I never wrote any of that to be purposely in there. And then later on, he came out and said, yes, I did that. That was my intentions. That was my intentions to put all the gay subtext in there. But anyway, the final moment in this documentary is Mark sitting down with that writer finally. And, it's a great moment. I'm not a fan of the writer per se, because I still think he's kind of a jerk. Especially when you watch this documentary, the way that he talks to Mark Patton, it's sad. Because, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 affected Mark Patton's life, and it affected his career, really. And he never had the career that he rightfully deserved. Like, he deserved a great career, a long living career, because he's such an amazing talent. But again, this documentary talks about his life, and I just really love it, and I appreciate it. And, I really love, wrapping this up, I really love that Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is now getting the love that it's always deserved. And again, I personally feel that the last 10, 12 years is when I was starting to hear people say they love this movie, because it was a rare few people that before that would say that they loved it. Because again, a lot of the time when I would hear people talk about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, they would talk about how bad it was and how it was the worst one or one of the worst ones of the franchise. And I never saw that. This has always been a movie I loved and I've cherished. And so again, I'm glad that this movie right here has now got the love that it's always deserved. And if you're a supporter of the LGBTQ plus community, if you're in the community, whatever it may be, if you're a horror movie fan especially, I recommend going back and watching A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 this month and revisiting this film. Or if you've never seen the movie before and you're trying to find some great gay-themed horror movies out there, check out Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It is my favorite gay-themed horror movie out there. And there's so many others I want to talk about, which I will talk about sprinkled throughout this month. But I wanted to kick off, my kind of movie recommendations this month with A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. The last thing I want to show off is a wonderful t-shirt that I got over 10 years ago that a friend of mine made, and it has Mark Patton on there. There's the famous shower scene where, he has the glove on. So I love that t-shirt. I've had it for a very long time. And, that was another thing. We really didn't have a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 merch. And we still don't have a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 merch out there. And I think we need more. We need more Nightmare on Elm Street 2 merchandise out there. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed my discussion about this movie. It wasn't really a review because people know about Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I just wanted to talk about things I loved. I wanted to talk about everything surrounding this movie. Talk about the lovely Mark Patton, who I adore this person so much. Mark, if you're watching this, I adore you. I hope you guys enjoyed my discussion on the best gay-themed horror movie out there, and that's Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. So, as always, I love you all. Remember to always be yourself, because you are amazing and you are beautiful. Don't change who you are. Always be you. And I'll talk to you all later.